Well, hello, and welcome everyone back to another episode of the TF Tuesday Podcast. I hope you all have had a restful week filled with transformation goodness. Today, I have a very exciting guest on to chat with us today, a little bit about himself and the work that he's done over the years, and a little bit about his professional life too. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Travis, or I also go by That Isle Beav, but you've probably seen me around the internet as That Isle Char, That Isle Cat, That Isle Skunk, and a bunch of other critters. I'm also ShadowFox014 on FA.
Yes, blast to the past with the username back on FA.
I know every guest, or not every guest, but a bunch of guests, I remember have said how like they've wanted to change their name before, and I'm like, yeah. My old username that I'm terrified if my family ever finds it, so would not mind updating that in the past. But.
No kidding. Yeah, I really do hope they eventually implement that. I am lucky in the sense that I picked my username and have never needed to change it since, but there's so many other people who, like, you know, when you're making your account, you just picked something and went with it. You weren't thinking like, oh, you know, this is what people are going to know me by. So like now it's like, oh, geez, please just let me like change my username.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, I was interested to hear, you know, before we dive into some overarching topic questions, I was curious to hear a little bit more about, you know, how you got into TF and what really kind of like brought you on the journey that has led you to where you are now.
Yeah, sounds good. So it's funny. I got into TF a long time ago. It was pretty much everyone had these like back in my childhood. Well, ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be an animal. I was fascinated by different critters that we saw. Like I'd eat breakfast or lunch and I'd just like look out in the backyard and every now and again you'd see a deer or a roadrunner or something. And I was like, oh, how cool would it be to be that? And I know I was obsessed with like The Lion King as a kid. And for one Halloween, I got to be Simba. So my parents got me a Simba costume, which was a huge mistake on their part because I wore that thing on Halloween, but also like every single night, and I would like try to wear it under my clothes and go to school just so I can like lift up my shirt a little bit and be like, oh no, I'm turning into a lion. And like I'd like run around the house and pretend to be a lion. So eventually my parents like got rid of it, but then I'd like steal it out of the trash can and like hide it, and then so I could like wake up at night, go put my little costume on and pretend I was a lion. And so I was obsessed with doing that sort of stuff until I came across some books and movies. Now it's funny because I know a lot of people mention things like Animorphs or like werewolf movies, but funnily enough for me it was Hocus Pocus.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
So I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh yeah.
Or at least know of what happens in the beginning to Thackeray Binks.
Oh, I've seen it many times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here I was, a little kid wanting to be an animal, obsessed with movies like Fox and the Hound, where I like pretended to be a fox, or The Lion King with lions, all the animated movies of our childhood. And then coming across Hocus Pocus with just the scene in the beginning, it's just on one day and I'm watching it. And the scene with the Sanderson sisters casting their spell and the camera from first person shrinking down as you hear Thackeray Binks turn into a black cat, and then the reveal shot of him just fully feral as a black cat, and then like his dad doesn't recognize him and all that. And after that was what I call my lean forward moment, where I lean forward, obviously not as a kid, but nowadays I'd lean forward and be like, dang it, I like this. Something about this. But because of that, when I first started getting onto the computer and started getting onto the internet, I think one of my first searches was boy turns into cat, because I didn't know what that movie was.
Right.
And so I'm like, I need to see what it was. And just kind of searching for that on the internet, I came across the Transformation Story Archive and a story called Cat Scratch Fever.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a cat transformation story.
Yeah.
And I have it saved on my hard drive today. I read that story and I loved it, so I downloaded it onto a floppy disk. And I started downloading a bunch of stories and things onto floppy disks. And then from there on, I was searching for like, oh my gosh, like what? This is amazing. This site's amazing. That led me to the Transformation Web Ring, which was like Thrash's gallery, and then Foxy.
All the good stuff.
A bunch of other people. And so I was hooked. From there on, I'm like, I don't know what this strange part of the internet was, but I like it.
Yeah.
And then years later, I found furry, and then got into that. And it's funny. It's like, yeah, TF led into furry.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, wow, these people with animal avatars are very nice on the internet. I like them. I'm going to have an animal avatar.
Yeah, I mean, hey, like, if you can't pretend always, well, you can pretend to be an animal in real life, but it's also fun to pretend to be an animal on the internet.
Exactly. Much easier too.
Absolutely. So then I guess, I really appreciate that story. And honestly, I think that's amazing that, in a weird way, your parents kind of enabled you to live out those TF fantasies. Were there any other, like, life experiences that kind of contributed to the way in which you've kind of explored TF now? Like, do you have like a tragic villain backstory?
It's interesting because like I had and I still have a very active imagination. Like those people who know me, like when I was a kid, I was always creating little stories in my head, and that led me eventually down the line of wanting to be a filmmaker, which is what I did through middle school and through high school, like script writing and all that stuff, and shooting our own short films and whatnot, and then into college, going to film school, and then being out into the film production universe. So having that really active imagination, anytime I'd be designing and playing games with my friends on my block, more than half the time we'd pick like who we want to play as in these games. I would be like Tails or Fox McCloud, or there's a theme here if you can't tell.
Oh, I can tell.
Things like that. Every Halloween I became very embarrassed to like want to be an animal. So after the whole like lion Simba thing, I just defaulted to be like, I want to be an army man. But I'd still wear the lion costume underneath that, and I would secretly hope just like one day for Christmas I'd get like a turtle costume or a skunk or something else. Yep. But really it was just like my overactive imagination as a kid. It's probably my tragic villain backstory. It's not really tragic or villainous, but yeah, like playing hide and go seek and imagining like all, like if I close my eyes and I just think really hard, my big fox ears can pinpoint where my friends are and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like after years of that and then finding Hocus Pocus and all these TF stories and art and all these fantastic creators, be like, okay, more people like this. Yep. This is neat. I need to explore this more.
No, that makes sense to me. And, honestly, I think it's really interesting that from a young age you were already so set on it that it was really just, the internet was bringing it out kind of afterwards. But even before you saw any kind of like depictions in media, it already seemed to have like its claws in you, so to speak.
Oh, totally. And yeah, coming across things like the Goosebumps books in school, or especially like the Choose Your Own Adventure ones. I know you mentioned it in a previous episode. Yeah. Like those kinds of books ruined me. Like I still have a couple of them, and they're dog-eared right on the pages where it's like, oh yeah, this is the ending where you turn into a bird and stuff like that. Or I'm like, yeah, as soon as coming across different mediums like that definitely sealed my fate.
Yeah, absolutely. I was the same way with the Goosebump books and all the different TF endings. It was like, no, I got to know exactly where it is so I can go back and read it 50 times at night when I'm supposed to be sleeping, like...
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. Something that I've wanted to talk about for a while on this podcast and haven't really been able to in terms of like a talking shop kind of way is photomanips. And
yes,
I know that you are another person who has done much in the way of photomanips, which is very exciting for me because it means I get to talk shop with you about it. In terms of like diving into your work as a photo manipulator, I mean, obviously I'm biased. I think there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the medium. To start off, I guess, what kind of drew you into manips as a medium in the first place?
Funnily enough, the reason I started doing... Actually, it's funny how this works out in my life, but I didn't set out to do morphs necessarily. I liked them. I came across them, I believe, on DeviantArt. I think the first people I saw was Drazenite.
Oh, yeah.
I apologize if I'm butchering their name.
No, I think that's how he pronounces it.
Oh, perfect. I always forgot if there's an I. So I came across their work, and it's photo manipulations are fascinating. And I'm sure we're both biased, but I'm sure you agree.
Yeah.
There's something unique about seeing a photo of someone literally transformed. Well, not literally, they're not literally transformed, but the photo itself is transformed. It's manipulated. It's morphed into something new. So that got me fascinated in it. And here I was consuming all of these stories and art and things on the internet, downloading stuff to my floppy disks and hiding the floppy disks from my parents so I can pull them out and put them in the computer and be like, here's a story about a guy turning into a fox. And stuff like that. So eventually I wanted to make my own transformation media. And so I started drawing. And at the time I was drawing really, really bad Sonic characters. So they had like the uni eyes, the big
Oh
eyes,
yeah.
and everything, and poses were terrible. And as many artists, especially young ones, like I was at the time, I wasn't happy with what the results I was getting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would destroy all of the pictures too, because again, I was hyper embarrassed over like anything my folks finding out. Like, they're highly accepting, they'd probably be totally cool with me being a furry and all of that, but I was just, there's one memory in my mind where I was like, hey mom, can I buy a tail? And she's like, what? And like the look on her face, I'm like, never mind, I won't ask again. She was just confused. But anyways, since I got onto the computer, like, I've loved graphic design. I have way too many hobbies, and one of them's graphic design and things like that.
It's truly your passion.
Yeah, so I literally have Photoshop open right now. I always have a graphic program of some kind open. I'm always like playing around with something.
Yeah.
So at the time, obviously, I couldn't afford Photoshop, and I was too afraid of the FBI kicking down my door and SWAT team throwing a stun grenade in there and like arresting me for pirating anything.
Yeah.
And so I had GIMP, and I think it was specifically GIMP Shop, which was their like slightly more Photoshop-y version.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great tool. I believe it's still around. I don't know about GIMP Shop, but GIMP is for sure.
GIMP is.
It was a great way to kind of like, I was like, okay, these Drazenite's doing this, other people are doing this, I want to try this. And so I took a photo of myself with my parents' old camera and then like edited around and was like, oh, this is kind of neat. Looks terrible, but it's kind of neat, and just kept at it. And so like it's funny how it spawned from me not knowing how to draw very well. So I was like, I'm gonna default to something I can do decently, and it just kept at it because, you know, the reactions of people that I like would show it to. Basically, it was an old TF website. I think you remember it. I don't know if you were on it or not, but you may remember it. It was called TF World.
Oh, I remember TF World very well.
Infamous. So eventually I found my way onto that website, and that's where I really just started doing tons of photo manipulations. And it was nothing but photo manipulations. So got to see a lot, got to play around with a lot. And another funny reason I bring up Drazenite is, after putting my stuff on there, like the first few things I made that I put on there, I got a message from him one day. And he's like, hey, I like your stuff, though I think you can improve in some ways. Would you be like open to like exploring, like doing some changes, like having some critiques and whatnot? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. And so he introduced me to another creator named Kedvu, or Out of the Box, or Toledo.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And so both of them were essentially my photo manipulation mentors. Drazenite was teaching me about like how to do the actual morphs, and Ked stepped in and he was like, here's how to do furring techniques. So I really had two phenomenal teachers who liked my stuff, my early stuff, and said like, you're almost like really there, like here's a little push to go ahead. And
yeah,
I'm super grateful, because without them I wouldn't have continued working on it. I may have just stopped like I did with drawing, but it kept at it, kept doing this. And it's a lot of fun. There's, like, going back to what I said earlier, there's something very unique about seeing a photo of yourself, or like anyone, but especially when you see a photo of yourself like with fox features or as a donkey, like something like that. It's like, this is unique.
Yeah. There's like almost as a visceral reaction I find when it's done well, because it's like you feel this connection to this media, and it almost like it feels like it was something you experienced in a way. Like, obviously, you know, it's just a picture and someone's made it into art, but it's like, oh shit, that happened to me. That is what I would look like as that thing, you know? It's so visceral. Yeah,
exactly. And especially since you've taken the photo.
Yeah.
Like, whoever the subject is, if they've taken the photo of themselves and it's not like a stock image of someone on the internet, like, you remember taking that photo. You remember like what you felt, like fake braying and like taking the picture, and how awkward that kind of feels to be like, oh, here's me, like, oh no, my arms are stretched out, or they're growing paws or something like that. And you kind of feel silly in the moment, or you can. And then you see the picture finished and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Like, oh, that's how it would look or feel. And yeah, there's another layer on top of that, like this psychological layer.
Yeah.
I'd love to bring up a story with one of my best friends who, for the longest time, has known I'm a furry since like high school. He's known I'm a furry, because it's not very much a secret with my friends. Like, I'm not just going to run around and be like, hey guys, I'm a furry. But it's hard to deny all the crap in my room.
Yeah, there's a lot of connections that are made anyway, so it's like, why bother hiding it?
Exactly. So he had never seen my Twitter though, because he's not on Twitter. So we went to a local brewery and we're having some beers, and he just like turns to me after like we're 4 beers in, so we're both feeling pretty good. Yeah. And he's just like, "Hey man, so I found your Twitter." And I'm like, by this point in my life, this was last year. Mm-hmm. So by this point in my life, I've been on Reddit and cringe compilations, YouTube with cringe compilations. I've been on like message boards where people have posted my old work and whatnot. And so I find it funny. I'd love to talk to you about that right after I'm done. But
oh yeah,
I was just like, "Oh yeah, so what'd you think?" And he's like, that elephant one like affected me. I'm like, "What do you mean?" It was like, it's like this one image really affected me. And I'm like, which one? Was it the eyes? And he's like, "Yes, it was the eyes." And I'm like, "Tell me more." Like lean another lean in moment, lean forward and be like, "Please tell me more." And he goes into saying like, yeah, the eyes are like the window to the soul, and like it's crazy how you made this where it's your eyes that I'm looking at now, like you as a person, and then here, like 2 frames over, an elephant. And I'm like, yeah, yes. And so we started talking about the philosophy of transformation and all this stuff. But I'm like, there's a visceral reaction people have seeing themselves or others in photographs digitally manipulated into something else. Like it's a wild trip. It's very hard to explain, but it's like everyone should experience it. It's pretty cool, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I've generally found that, particularly when it's like working for like a commission for someone else, or like seeing like someone get like their first like manip commission from someone else, there's this reaction that people have to the final product that I think is really unique when it comes to commissioning art or making art in the fandom, in the sense of, you know, like you said with the eyes comment, it's like I can see myself and I'm now experiencing what it would look like to have been going through that in the moment when that photo was taken.
Exactly.
Like you were saying before, that psychological effect, it can run pretty deep, especially if, you know, the manip is well done. Like if it passes the uncanny valley test and it looks realistic, the feeling that you can get from it is unlike any other. And again, I'm wildly biased here, but I think it's amazing.
Aren't we all? But yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and so it's funny you mentioned the cringe compilations. I do actually want to come back to that.
Yes.
Because I have also gone through that. I feel like most people who have made photo manips at some point have ended up in those kind of like Reddit or even BuzzFeed at one point cringe compilations. And, you know, when I was starting to make manips, it's funny you actually talked about Drazenite and Ked, because I also later worked with both of them, although my kind of growth came much later. It's funny, actually, this is a sidebar to the sidebar, but if you go back through your gallery, you can see one of the first trades that we did with each other. And
9 years ago. 9
years ago, yeah, yes. We're dating ourselves a little bit. And you can see the amazing picture that you did, and then the kind of rudimentary one that I did. And I always kind of like chuckle at it in retrospect, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I was like wildly out of my league at my time. My growth came later. But I mean, anyways.
I was going to say, that cheetah is fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
The gazelle's a bit blurry. I think I've gotten a bit better at making things sharp. But
yeah,
I believe you were a gazelle. I forget. Yeah, you were a gazelle.
Yeah, I was. I don't know. I just look at the furring now, and I'm like, oh, there's so many things I could do differently. This was before I got my fur tutorial, though, so that explains it.
We know what we have to do. We have to update that at some point.
Yeah, that's true. You know, we really do. We should do that at some point.
It would be fun. Coming up on, oh God, the dates. We're coming up on 10 years.
Yeah, the 10-year anniversary, you know? Oh my gosh. Something to think about. Yeah. But to go back to the cringe compilations thing, I feel like it's almost a rite of passage with a lot of manippers in 100%. Terms of getting in those. And I guess I was curious, you know, since you mentioned it, like, how did you handle that? Because I know that the first time I was in one, I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh, this could be, anyone could find like my stuff through this. And now, like, if I ever have been put in one, I think I got put in one like 2 years ago, I found it and I laughed. Like, I laughed at all the comments and I laughed at what was done, because it's like, you know, it rolls off me now. But how did you kind of deal with it when that happened to you?
So similar to you, the first time I was terrified, again, because similar to you, I was like, oh, I have no. Will my cousins find this? I have a lot of cousins. I have 70 people in my family. So I'm like, well, would they find this? Like, what if these people find this? I'm like, should I delete my stuff? Should I leave the country? What do I do? And then after calming down, I read the comments, and I love the comments on those. If anytime I'm on one, I'm disappointed if someone comes like, oh, hey, I saw this one on Reddit, or I saw this on YouTube in a cringe compilation, and I'm like, is it a new one, or is it the one from like 2015, like 2015? I'm like, oh, okay. Like I've read those. It was neat, but I want the new ones, because going through some of the comments on one of them, they would be it was a chocolate Labrador transformation I did of myself in my bathroom, and
I remember this one.
Yeah, it's my infamous one. I need to put a little badge on it that says "as seen on Reddit" on the actual on the thumbnail, so you click on it.
Yeah.
In that, it was on I think it was on Blurst, the Blessed Cursed one recently. That was like a couple years ago, but it was on a bunch of I forget the name of the subreddits, but it was on a few of them, and people would say like, "This is terrifying," but I like it for some reason. And I'm like, gotcha. I'm like, yes. And or things like that, where people would be like, "This is blessed and cursed." I'm like, so you do like it.
That's a compliment.
Yeah, it's that side that I really latched onto and I loved, where people like, why do they like it? They like it for some reason. If they just hated it, they wouldn't be commenting on it. They wouldn't take the time to put it into a video and add like an audio track or something like they did with a Mew one I did. But like, they took the time to do that. They like it in some fashion. And to me, too, I'm like, I need to go back and remake that Chocolate Lab TF. A, because I've been getting into Chocolate Labs a lot more. They were the original species I really liked for dog TFs.
Oh, nice.
And then I found, like, other ones, like Dobies, which became, like, A tier. But I'm also like, I don't know, there's something nice about the floppy ears and whatnot. So I'm like, they're also getting back up there. But, like, B, it's funny, it's like, that's my most infamous one. I'm like, I would love to just see their comments about my recent ones. Like, what do you guys think about this?
Yeah.
What do you think about this one? Like, I just want to do an AMA. I'm like, I made this cursed image. It's me. What do you guys think about this one? Like, is it neat? Is it terrifying? What don't you like about it? What do you like about it? And just do market research that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Honestly, I would love to see that with some of those people talking about mine too, because again, it's really funny whenever you see people commenting on that, and there will inevitably be people who are like, oh, actually, no, this one isn't that bad. Or like, one thing I've noticed with mine is, since my watermarks have the year in which they're made on it, some people will point out like, oh yeah, you can tell he's improved. And I'm like, yes, thank you. That is all the validation I needed from this. I have indeed improved. I'm glad you recognize it, even if you think this is cursed or whatever.
Yeah, you're like, thank you, random Redditor.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no, I honestly, like, those kind of comments, you can take those to the bank, because you know there is absolutely no, like, real incentive for them to be, like, you know, fake nice. So if they're saying, like, I see improvement, or, like, that one's not half bad, I will take that. I will absolutely take that.
Exactly. And, like, they don't have to worry about trying to be nice that you're there. Like, if you're standing in front of them, they might be like, you know, they're not that bad. But they don't even know you exist, like, on the board or anything, and then they'll just say what's on their mind. And for them to say that, you're like, yes, this is true.
Yeah, 100%. And so, you know, it's funny that, you know, we kind of came to this topic organically. I find that with manips, there's actually a pretty significant barrier towards making them actually look good. Oftentimes there's the concern about falling into the quote-unquote uncanny valley, where it doesn't really look real, it doesn't really look artificial, and people don't really know how to react to it. So how did you kind of build up your skills so that you could overcome it? I know you obviously mentioned, you know, kind of the mentoring, but were there any other specific things that you did to try and help surmount that kind of valley?
You know, I hope I'm out of it, but I don't know. Sometimes it's fun to be inside it, too.
I definitely think you're out of it.
Okay, cool.
I genuinely think you have in a very incredible way.
Why, thank you. Yeah, it's funny because I don't think I did anything consciously. I wasn't ever thinking about, like, how do I overcome making this seem uncanny? I was just never satisfied with a style. And, like, if you go back through my gallery, you'll kind of notice how my morphs have shifted in style. Like, I used to do fur textures. I have different ways I categorize Photomanipulations.
Yes.
Like, one of which is way I called Frankensteining, but not in like a bad, no bad connotations whatsoever. But Frankensteining is the method I consider, with like taking parts of different pieces, like pieces of different animals and different stock, and combining them.
Oh, photobashing.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. It's called photobashing.
Oh, fantastic. So yes, that's how I started. And then I had a period where 100% of it was fur I created. Then I got into fur I created and parts of stock. So it's like a mix. And then now it's all of the above plus a lot more post-processing and like lighting techniques and things I picked up from photo editing and film and all that kind of stuff, and just merging them. A lot more composition, actually. So my previous stuff doesn't have composition, but especially now, everything is composited. So there's tons of different elements. I think the elephant, to go back to that one, the sequence thick skin, in that, I think I told somebody I had like 28 or 27 or 28 images. So I think at first they thought like, you did a 28 image like morph sequence? I'm like, oh no, sorry to disappoint you. It's like 8. It's 27 images total in the entire sequence.
Yeah.
So I think it was really just over the years experimenting with style and then slowly being like, I don't really like the way this fur is like, it's too blurry. It's too smudged. I want something sharper, but I don't want to use just the animal's fur texture because I can't find anything super high quality. So it's like mixing and matching and playing, and then obviously going to school and working and doing stuff and coming back to it and jumping back and forth between different hobbies and whatnot. So it a happy accident to be on the other side of the valley, longingly looking across.
No, that's awesome. And, I think it's really interesting that you've gone through the different sorts of approaches and then kind of combined them all to make it your own. Because I definitely think that there is oftentimes a lot of new folks in photo manipping will start with the kind of photo bashing route. And then if they stick with it long enough, they'll try to merge or kind of progress to the other kind. And if you do stick with it even after that, then you kind of like find a way to incorporate both. So I think it's really interesting that you've kind of moved through it in that way. And I feel like a lot of people, if they stick with it, that's kind of the path they end up taking.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm super glad to know it's called photobashing.
Yeah, there you go. Learn something new on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, so I guess then, when it comes to tools that you use now, I know obviously before you were using GIMP, do you use like Photoshop now? What kind of like tools do you generally use when you're making your manips? I know you mentioned lighting and such.
Yeah, so primarily when it comes to the actual morphs themselves, I use Photoshop CC. So I use the dreaded Photoshop Cloud.
Ah, yes.
Mainly because I've used Photoshop for years. I've used it for a decade now. I had the pirated versions in college, and then when I could buy it, I bought I forget which one, but I bought one of the CS creative suites, and then I was able to write that off. And then I got into the CC because of work. So I do a lot of things in Adobe Premiere with editing and stuff like that, Audition, all of that kind of stuff. So it came with it, and I'm like, I'm going to keep using it because I like it. So I'm mainly just used to it by now. But people made morphs in so many different programs and whatnot, and I could do it so many different ways. I'm very comfortable in Photoshop. I know all the keys, I know all the shortcuts, I got all my stuff made and tweaked the way I like it, and I have it open right now. Like I said, it's always open on my computer.
Yeah, no, I'm a Photoshop person as well. I'm still chugging along with my CS5 extended copy. I have not budged from it. I probably should at some point, but I'm also comfortable in it, so I feel that.
Totally.
So then I guess, thinking about kind of the medium as a whole, I've kind of noticed that there's been an overall drop-off in the number of photo manip artists online, at least the ones who are posting their stuff. So do you have any theories on what the cause of that might be, or do you disagree? Maybe I'm completely off base with this observation.
I don't know. I agree and disagree a little bit. I definitely agree. I think a lot of the more consistent posters, there are a few I can name, like Neon Hyena used to do a ton. I don't believe they do anymore. I remember doing trades and stuff with them. There's several other Photomanipulation artists that don't do, if any, they don't do a whole lot of morphs anymore. And I think it could be a multitude of factors. Obviously, life getting in the way, or maybe because I know one person joined the military who I talked to, and I'm like, he's off to the Air Force, so he's not going to be doing these.
Yeah.
And then other folks I've noticed sometimes will pick up traditional art or digital/traditional art that go into drawing, and they'll switch mediums. Similar to I started getting to drawing later on, and they might like that more. It might be easier, a multitude of reasons to do that. So I think, I do agree people drop off, and it could be for, I don't know, life reasons, or they just don't like the medium as much. It was a way to kind of like play around and get used to things, and they switched to digital painting. And I mean, because there's a lot of similarities between digital painting and photo manipulations. I should just say morphing or manipping. It's a lot easier. There's an artist I'm trying to remember the name of. I think it was Splice? Maybe Splice. They do phenomenal like digital paintings and whatnot.
Oh, Spliced. Yeah. I know who you're talking about. Yep.
So I was talking with them once, and they brought up how Morphs and digital painting share a lot in common. And so we were talking about possibly doing a trade years ago, and I still feel super bad because they were like, yeah, if you draw like a beaver, I'll paint it. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And I'm like, I really can't draw beavers. I'm like terrible at that. So that didn't go anywhere, and to this day I still feel super bad about that. Yeah, so maybe that's a reason too for certain artists. They start, as you get more and more into the actual manipulation and adding your own highlights and shadows and doing all of that, you just be like, well, if I just draw the figure, then you control 100% without having the reliance on a stock photo, a base to work off of, and then it just kind of goes from there. But at the same time too, I have noticed there are a lot of photo manipulations. There's a lot of like smaller accounts or like new accounts, new people, or even older artists who will like try their hand at a photo manipulation. They'll be like, yeah, I just decided to do this one day. And it's like, that's freaking awesome. Like, that's so cool. Like, keep at it. And anytime I see a new one, I'm like, that's awesome. Please do more. Like, we need people.
We need more.
It is still cool though to like go on and see stuff like that you create, or Pythos or White Flame K. Artists like you guys who are way more consistent than I am, and other manippers. There, I caught myself.
Yeah.
And it's inspiring because every time I see something from you guys, or from you, or from White Flame, or from Pythos, I'm like, oh yeah, like I really want to do these. Like I need to do these.
Yeah, I always try to keep the medium going. I'm very dedicated to it. I've talked before about how I can't really do the whole transitioning to digital art. So this is where I am, and this is where I will stay. But I think it's interesting that you kind of mentioned the similarities, because there are a lot of similarities between the two, and it obviously depends on how you approach creating them in the first place. But I think that overall there are a lot of common points. So then I guess, obviously you have also kind of transitioned in some ways to doing more in the realm of drawn art, although obviously you still do manips. Was kind of the logic behind that what you described, in the sense of it gave you 100% control over the final product, or was there something else that kind of drove you getting back into drawing?
I think it was multifaceted in several ways, obviously. The biggest one is I can never leave projects behind. I'm very like nostalgic, if that's the right word for it, because like the games I created when I was a kid with my friends on the block, I still have all the sheets in my closet. I have a binder filled with all of the rules and how everything broke down and all of that stuff. And when I was really young and I was on a long card trip, I was like designing my own card game, and I still have those cards up there and stuff like that. Oh, wow. And now I'm designing card games with my friend. So like I use that as a base into stuff to do on. So when it came to drawing, like I've always wanted to revisit drawing. And so getting the Morphs and then meeting all these awesome TF creators and TF fans and furries and all of this, I was like, yeah, like I loved seeing Fazar, like Harabis, come out with drawings, or Silverclaw 1, Emberbat, like all of these people, like stuff from Stripes / Royal, like all of these fantastic creators. I'm like, yes, like I want to do that too. And additionally, Morphs are phenomenal, but there's a barrier to entry for people who can receive them, like people who can actually be subjects, because you need pictures. And there are some friends I have who don't have a good camera, or don't have the privacy, and don't have the ability to take photos of themselves that I can use to edit. And sometimes they can give me a photo, but it's like really blurry, it's out of focus, and there are like, I don't want to insult their photography skills, but there are basics to photography that are required. Ample light, so there's less noise, you need that sharpness, there's like just a basic amount of, not necessarily photographic knowledge, but the camera has to perform at a base level for it to work. And so for those people, I'm like, I want to make stuff for them, but I can't, because I don't have the ability. Like obviously I could take a picture of myself, but it's not the same. So
it's not the same.
With drawing, I'm able to go like, oh hey, like to one of my friends I've known for a long time, here's a picture of you turning into a chicken, or here's like a hippo TF for you. And then I can go to another person. I can like, because I've done a couple Pokemon manips before, but they're way harder because, especially the ones that aren't necessarily based off like a real animal, like a Houndour is going to be easier than like a Dragonite. That's going to be a lot harder. It's gonna, in the sense that it's not, you can't really look at a Komodo dragon and be like, oh, it's a 1-to-1, just purple or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's a way too to be like, I want to draw my boyfriend turning into a Charizard because he loves Charizard TF. So I want to draw my other friend turning into a Lycanroc because he loves Lycanroc TFs. That kind of stuff, where it's like, it's easier to gift things to people and make things for people. And as with digital art as a medium versus Photomanipulations, which I would still love to do for them, but it requires that barrier to entry has to be passed. I need a photograph to do it.
No, that's a great point.
I think that's both of those, just me wanting to actually revisit it, because there are certain topics and stuff I can do in drawing that I can't really do with Morphs as easily. And to use a quote from my high school, I was going to say art teacher, but he's not. He does like everything. My film teacher from high school creates something from nothing. And like that definitely drove me to be like, here's a blank canvas. I want to do a gift picture for my friend. I want him to be turning into a duck. So I can do that. I can't do that unless I have a photograph with Morphs, but I can do it with a blank canvas and like a piece of paper.
No, I completely agree with that. I will confess that it is much harder to do gift art for someone when, you want to make it a surprise and it's like, well, you need a picture of them and your options are very limited. So yeah, I definitely agree on that. And it makes sense. There's just a lot more freedom that you have when you are 100% creating something off the page, whereas the photos, like you said, there needs to be a base level of skill in taking the photos and actually have them be well lit and have them decently defined. It does pose an unfortunate barrier for entry. Yeah.
Now that being said, I will still I won't give up Morphs. There is a reason I have had like a super long, I haven't created art in a while, and so that'll hopefully change soon. I'm dealing with it. It's a lot of life has been moving fast this year, so I'm not out of the game yet. I still love TF way too much, and as much as I love drawing, I still love Morphs, especially because now I really it's funny. I know a bunch of artists sometimes will look at their pieces and be like, I don't really like that, or I don't really like that. I'm stoked about everything because it's just fun. My favorite part of making art is giving it to someone. Like doing a morph or doing a drawing for someone, and then just seeing that initial reaction of them, just being like, oh my god! Like I had a friend who took a selfie of himself once to show me oh, it's a new haircut I got. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks awesome. And I downloaded the picture and I morphed him into turning into a cougar, and I was like, oh hey, by the way, here's you turning into a cougar. And it's just his reaction. I'm just like, oh my god.
That's amazing.
That sort of stuff. Well, I'm addicted to that sort of stuff. So I'm gonna do more, definitely.
Amazing. I'm really glad to hear that. I've definitely been missing your stuff, so I am eager to see it when you get back to it. I think that, life comes at people pretty quickly and can interfere with a lot of creative stuff. So, what's important is always to make sure that you find a way to preserve that passion and then, come back to it when the time is right,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So then I guess as a last point before we move on to some other topics, because I know we've been yapping in everyone's ears about photomanip.
Do Morphs, people.
Yeah, do Morphs. That's the message to this episode. But what tips do you have for anyone who's trying to get into photomanipulation but doesn't really know where to start?
I'd say my number one tip would be to experiment. Just constantly be experimenting. Even if you kind of like what you're doing, like a technique, don't forget the technique, don't get rid of the technique, but try new things. Always be trying new things. Try it a different way of furring, or try shading a certain way, or try harder critters or different critters. I think doing that, you can really find a workflow that you didn't know before. You can discover new techniques that you didn't know before. I can't tell you the amount of stuff that I've learned by just trying something completely new with a piece. And just being like, wow, that worked really well. I really like that. I'm going to continue doing that. Especially with my recent ones, which a lot of headshot morphs and things like that. It's really fit a lot of blends with animals. I really enjoyed the look of that. So I'm like, I'm going to keep doing these. And then I'm like, I'm going to add text. And I'm going to do weird, crazy stuff with the text and stuff like that. If I didn't just throw caution to the wind and be like, there's text in drawings from people like Stickman or Ember or people like lots and lots of artists. So I'm like, I want to integrate that into my stuff. And so doing that, I'm like, I like the way this looks. If you don't experiment, you won't know. So my number one tip would be experiment. Number two tip would be take breaks. Like you might be working on something. There have been plenty of commissions or trades and things I've done where I don't like the look of it, and so I'll walk away, and I'll go play a game, or I'll work on something else, or do some other activity, and then come back, and then you'll be like, oh, that's what is wrong with it. I know what to do. Having that fresh set of eyes, and it doesn't have to be necessarily for morphs too. Like this is great for everything. I learned this through editing. Just taking breaks, walking away, and coming back to something a little bit later is just a great way to be like, oh, here's X, here's Y, and to work out where Z is and all that kind of stuff. And then I think especially, you might agree with this. I'd like to hear your take on this. The third tip would be you have to prepare for negatives, for like negative reaction, but don't let that discourage you. You definitely don't worry. Like try as hard as you can. Like do not worry about what people think on the internet. Like people will probably look at early pieces. I mean, some maybe not. You might be like super good. I've seen some like first time morphers. They're like, my God, I wish I was you when I was young. But if you get negative comments or something, we've all been there. We've all got like, I look at my old stuff and I laugh now, but it's like you have to start somewhere. And so you'll start and you might not know, like the muzzle might be awkwardly angled or something like that. It's like you will get your stride. You just have to keep at it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I will say that I think that preparing for potential negativity is a big part of it too, for exactly the reasons you said. Like I've had pieces on FA that literally got brigaded, and it's not great at the time. You got to steel yourself for it a little bit, but I've actually left it up. It's still in my scraps of my FA, because sometimes I'll just go back and I'll look at where I was, and then I can look at where I am now, and there is a very clear progression. They don't look like they're even made by the same person, and I think that's a testament to how far you can go if you keep at it and you keep practicing. So I echo all of the things you said. I think that taking breaks can be really helpful. I've had pieces that I didn't actually finish for, like, I worked in bursts over the course of a year before I was happy with them. So it can just take a little bit of time, but it's important to be able to walk away and then come back to it with a fresh set of eyes. And yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add to that from a personal note is if you're really serious about doing it yourself and you have the ability to do so, get a little handheld camera. It can do wonders. I have used the same handheld camera for close to 9 years now.
Nice.
It's still working magically, and that was like a godsend in terms of actually like upping my stock game, and I have reaped the benefits for years on end. So getting a good little camera can really make a difference.
Yeah, actually, if I can add two quick other tips to the list. Number one, if you shoot with an iPhone, if you have an iPhone, especially like a modern iPhone 11, 12, 13, I don't forget what numbers they're on. But any of those, if you switch your photo mode over from HEIC or from JPEG to HEIC, the photos are very sharp, and they're very good for adding into morphs or even using them as a primary source. There are several pieces in my gallery where like the shirts or the other images in there, I did a capuchin monkey fairly recently. All of those shots are from an iPhone. So it's like you don't even need, like, having a dedicated camera is phenomenal, but even with modern phones, it doesn't have to be an iPhone too. Any of the Androids could do it as well, like the Pixels and whatnot. Yeah. Any of those with the right settings, you have to make sure you have ample lighting. You have to make sure, actually, broader tip right here too, for photos, specifically for photo manipulations.
Lighting.
Exposure, having enough light for the sensor. To go into a little bit into the science, having enough light for the sensor so the ISO is low is very important, so that way you have less noise in your image. Remember, you can always add noise into your image for a look, but it's very difficult to remove it.
Very hard.
So definitely have the lighting, play around with compositions. and have fun with taking the photos. Like if you don't use photos of yourself, then if you get stock of other people, like play around with it, cut the legs off, like do weird stuff with it. Now how I work now with Morphs is I'll do things on like a blank canvas, and then like there's a camel in my gallery that's it's like in a carnival. There's a carnival in the background. There's like pink magic. In that one, I started on a blank canvas. There's going to be like more of the body. There's going to be like I love camel TFs, and especially the hump. So there's going to be the hump and everything in that. And I was playing around with them. And I really like this just as a headshot. So then just crop most of the body out and just be like, I'm just going to focus on this. That's definitely phenomenal. And my final tip before we can move on would be I don't want to sign you up for this, but if you're just starting out doing morphs, or you're interested in doing morphs, like reach out to some people who do photo manipulations. Like I love talking about photo manipulations, and I would be more than happy to like assist in looking at something and being like, oh, maybe you like change this or do this or doing that sort of stuff. I know I've notoriously said for years I want to make a tutorial, and I still would, but especially now with like working so much, I don't think I have the time to do that or really like do a whole lot of live streaming and showing processes, but I'm still always available to talk.
Yeah.
And
I'm the same way.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be just about morphs. It could be about transformation in general. I love talking TF. But yeah, I think I reach out to somebody, because I obviously like I don't have the time to reach out to a bunch of people. Like I feel super bad, as I know a lot of people I need to like constantly hit up more, because I'm very bad. I will respond, but I'm very bad at reaching out. So if you reach out, if you poke me, I will make beaver noises and then be like, here's morph things, or here's a PSD, or like all that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's amazing. You know what? I feel like you've said everything that I was going to say, because I'm literally the same way on both. You can reach out to me anytime. I'm terrible at messaging first. I will always respond. All of that is me as well.
There's a trend here with morphers.
Yes, there's clearly a trend. But yeah, I think all of those are really well-made points. And yeah, I think, as someone who's very dedicated to the medium, I just want to see more people get into it.
Yeah,
so if there's a way that I can help to facilitate it, I want to do that. So
completely agree.
Amazing. Moving on a little bit, I think, you've talked a little bit before and during this podcast already about kind of your more professional work in terms of working within, the industry, and specifically around like audio and visual stuff. I was curious if you'd be willing to talk a little bit more about that. Like, has it ever touched on any kind of cool overlaps with regards to transformation at all? And has it kind of like informed how you approach your art?
While I would love to say it has, unfortunately, it has not.
Damn.
I would have loved to have worked on like a werewolf movie or something. When I was in college, I was in a screenwriting class, and one of our assignments was we had to keep a notebook, and every single day we had to write one film or short film or series or just one narrative idea a day.
Right.
And like most of us in that class, I slacked off. And so it would be Wednesday or Thursday, we'd all hang out and we'd write ideas down. And like 80 to 90% of my ideas were transformation themed. And my professor read every single one of them. And several of them he'd circle and be like, this is a cool idea. Like I had a short film idea about a hunter who goes out, a guy who lives in the woods in a cabin, goes out every morning to get food, like gather to hunt and do stuff. And he'd always see this red fox. And he wouldn't do anything to the red fox. They just kind of mutually acknowledge the other's existence. And one day he goes out and he falls. He slips. He falls down like a hill and hurts himself incredibly bad. And he sees the fox. And then a short period later, he wakes up and he's a fox. And then the fox is there. He's now a fox, and they just run off together. And it's just like, just a little story, a little TF nugget. And that's one that Tortilla, as we called him, as he circled, and he's like, this is cool. I like this one. And I had tons of those, along with just machinima ideas and a bunch of other random stuff.
Of course.
But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't gotten to work on anything TF related. I haven't. I think the only technical transformation, besides like all of the corporate speak, because every corporate boardroom loves the word transformation. So I always giggle.
God, yeah.
Yeah, I giggle because I do a lot more corporate than I do narrative now. And actually now I do a live broadcast. That's my main job. But in the corporate world, every single expo or something I did tech on, it would be like the power of transformation. So I take a photo of the screen, just giggle to myself like, oh, if only you knew. Or like, and be in the back while stage managing. How embarrassing would it be for the stage manager to turn into a camel or a donkey or something like that? I'm like, so unfortunately, nothing directly transformation, but that and then weight loss things. I've worked on those, so it's transformation in a way.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's funny you mentioned the corporate speak with the word transformation, though, because I also work in industry and
Oh, nice.
not your industry, but in terms of like professional stuff. But they love to talk about the digital transformation. That's their favorite phrase right now because of,
Yes.
all the things that are moving online and, even things like talking about like the metaverse or whatever the hell. And
Yeah.
they'll be like, oh, yes, we have to prepare for the digital transformation this and digital transformation that. And every time I hear the phrase, I chuckle for the same reason because
Yeah.
it's like, oh, if only you knew. I've been doing digital transformations before you even knew that was a phrase. So,
Yes. Welcome to my world. Walk
Yeah,
into the
exactly.
walk into the boardroom like, you're a donkey, you're a zebra, you're a tiger. Just be like, this is how it goes now.
Yeah, this is just how it be.
Exactly.
Oh man. But I mean, while it's a shame it hasn't touched on more like formally TF stuff, I still think it's really cool and it sounds
Mhm.
like at the very least, because you've gotten so much kind of information and experience in terms of working with things like lighting, it sounds like that has at least had an impact in maybe how you take your stock photos or how you approach that stuff.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've done a lot of different things in my career. It's very funny to look back in the last 10 years and be like, when I was in high school, I shot my own videos and I edited and I wrote them. I acted in some of them. So I did all of that sort of stuff. And then going into college, I was like, I'm going to be an editor. I'm going to do film editing. And when I get to college, everyone wants to be an editor and a director of photography. And
Right.
so I'm like, oh, I will do something different. So I got into sound, which is the only reason I got into sound is no one was doing it. And I was an editor on a project, but since no one was doing sound, I picked up the sound equipment and learned how to do it. And because I was working on our project one Saturday, the group that was going next was like, hey, can you do sound for us? Because we don't have a sound guy. And then the third weekend, people were there and they're like, hey, can you do sound for us? Because we don't have a sound guy. And then I was the only sound person in school. And but the last senior year, I was teaching other folks how to do sound. My best friend in college, he and I were the only two sound people. So we were doing design, mixing in 5.1, doing all this crazy stuff. It's very funny how doing that and then getting out of college, and I was working with a lighting and grip guy in Orange County. So I knew nothing about lights and grip, so I learned a lot about the physical light fixtures and all of that. Then I get into live streaming and then live production and corporate, all of this stuff. And yeah, over the years, all of that has trickled into transformation stuff because, like as you said, lighting is very important. There's techniques to being a director of photography and like lighting products and lighting all that kind of stuff. And I own some lights myself, and I'm fortunate to own some nice cameras. So when it comes to taking stock, I will set up lights. I'm like, I've learned you don't need to just do low key lighting. Low key, I think it's low key lighting.
Yeah, low key.
It doesn't need to be like flat and like you can see everything. It's, as my professors would say, it's lit, but it's not interesting. And so there is a power to learning about shadows and like harsh lighting and like how you use it and where you can use it and the fun things you can do to create a mood and things like that. And so you don't have to learn it through filmmaking. I just happen to, but you can learn this through painting. You can learn this through drawing. You can play video games and see like, what do I really like about this, and analyze media that you enjoy and see what you like about the techniques when it comes to lighting and all that kind of stuff. So like it's film and television, new media and all of that definitely has taught me about the concepts behind things like lighting and all of that. But on a different note too, through editing and through working with big clients and like big companies and all this other stuff too, there's like little life lessons I've learned from people I've worked with, like producers and directors who are decades older than me that I'm working with. I'm normally like I used to be the youngest person on set. The director of photography would be like 40, and then like director themselves would be 40 to 50, and the lighting and grip guys would be like upper 30s, 40s, and then I walk in 22 years old, and I'm like, I'm your lead sound mixer. I'm in charge of all your sound for the day. I hope I don't screw up. And so,
That's amazing.
But there's a lot of little things where one of the it's not really a little thing. One of the big things you learn in film, and it's definitely a thing in other industries too, but you learn in film very quickly, very fast, is you have to be creative, flexible, and adaptable. You have to be a great problem solver, because if you aren't, you won't get that shot. You won't make the day on time. Something goes wrong. Even today, I was at work, and we were doing a small shoot on the patio, doing a small live stream for an internal company thing, and audio keeps dropping out. So I'm on a headset being like, they're like, you sound garbled. The mic doesn't sound good. And we're like, okay, we have to go live in 5 minutes. So it's like, okay, move this closer to this. It's probably this transmission issue. So this has to go here. That has to go here. We'll run this to this. And like just being able to think on your feet and be very quickly. Obviously, you're not necessarily on that sort of time crunch when it comes to creating TF media, when you're writing a story or you're creating art or you're making a TF audio story or audio book or something like that. But being able to think outside the box, being able to, like, again, step away from a moment. I learned that from editing, to step away and come back a little bit later. Being able to do that and like think of like, what if I try this? Like, this might not work, but what if I try it? Or like, what if I try this technique and like it might not work, but let's go for it. Why not? Like, all of that stuff you learn very fast on a film set because you have to. And it definitely taught me over the years, like, yeah, you have to be agile, you have to be quick. And related to that, to continue my rant, related to that, there are plenty of times too where I might be obsessing over a little detail. I used to do this really early in my career as a sound designer or a sound mixer on set, where I'd hear a dog bark like 5 blocks away, or like a guy like open his front door too loud, and I'd be like, oh wait, you have to do the takeover again. I heard something. And eventually I learned a lot of little details, but there are little details that you can and you should forgive. Like, you should, like, yeah, it's not 100% perfect, but it doesn't need to be. And that's not to say to like be very sloppy with XYZ, like to be sloppy with your work or something like that. Like, obviously if you think something's wrong, go ahead and fix it. But if you obsess over the little details or you're trying to make everything perfect, then at some point it becomes detrimental to you finishing that project, moving on to the next one, or enjoying it. You might be like, this is one line isn't right. You keep changing it. But like, to an outside observer, to a client or to someone else, obviously the whole meme with the 2 cakes where like, oh boy, cake. Yeah. And the guy's like super happy. It's that where it's like, they're going to see it and they're going to love it. And it's like that little detail isn't really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, because like to them, it adds character or adds something, or it's a part of the piece that they bought, or the part of the experience of giving the gift. So it's like, especially learning that through what we call disposable media that we take pride in, but it's like, yeah, this is gonna be viewed twice and never watched again. Like, I've done BlizzCon, and we go into that and be like, yeah, no one's gonna watch the video. Like, they're gonna watch it live, and they're gonna do the stuff live, and they're not gonna go back and be like, hey guys, let's watch these interviews from like BlizzCon 2018. Like, no one cares. So there is a certain like, yeah, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Obviously, do a good job if you're working professionally. Like, do a good job, but you can forgive the little details and things because it'll be cleaned up, or like it adds to something, etc. Might not be the best advice, but it's something I learned over the years to be kind of like more relaxed with certain details and certain things. Be like, yeah, it's not absolutely perfect, but it still gets the job done, gets the job done well, gets the job done on time. There's like huge benefits. Then you can move on to your next project, and you can know what you did wrong there, or you can anticipate what might go wrong, and you can fix it ahead of time.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with all of that. And, I think it's really funny that you've kind of mentioned the fact that learning how to work on your feet and like kind of come up with quick solutions is something that's kind of furthered your own other stuff, like your art stuff and just in general. I think that that's really interesting because I don't think at first glance you would make that connection, but it makes sense. I mean, a lot of creating art is trying different things, trying to figure out what is not going right, and drilling into finding solutions and trying a variety of different solutions until you get to whatever it is that ends up solving the problem. So I think it's really interesting that that is kind of part of it. And the part about not focusing on the little minute details spoke to my soul, because editing this podcast,
Oh, yes.
you know, as I'm sure you're aware, sound editing, you know, when you're doing that, you hear all the little things. And
Yes.
then, you know, when people listen back to it, they don't necessarily, you know, pick up on those small things. So
Yeah.
I and, you know, the other editors who helped me with this podcast have had to like remind ourselves, it's like sometimes you just have to let that little stutter go, or that, you know, it's okay. Everything is fine. The world will not end. The podcast will still sound okay. So
Exactly.
I appreciate you mentioning that,
For
because
sure.
it's been on
And
my mind a lot lately.
yeah, exactly. And to add to that too, especially in this medium, like you know your medium too. Like obviously, if you're drawing, just kind of like play around with the medium a bit. Obviously, we're on a podcast right now. It's being recorded. I can see the waveforms and everything. So we could play around with that, and a stutter, stepping on someone a little bit, apologizing, the laughter. It's all real. It's all raw. It's authentic. So it's like it can work. Like, so those little details that might look like a problem, some noise in the photo that you took, or something looked kind of weird, it could add to it. It actually is.
Yeah.
It lends credibility to whatever it is, or could add credibility, or it could add authenticity to whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
A camera
It all just
shake.
depends.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it all depends on just the context, and it can really benefit pieces.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's funny you kind of mentioned, like, you know, the different medias and how that affects the final products. You know, one thing that I've kind of noticed about your stuff is also you have an ability to craft these really cool physical items that have a TF theme. And
Why, thank you.
there's not a lot of people who I've seen kind of do physical products from like a TF perspective. So like obviously, you know, off the top of my head, there's like the transformation license, there's the kind of rudimentary TF badges, and the Pleasure Island ticket sets. What kind of like inspired you to start doing that kind of stuff?
It's funny you bring all that up. I have long loved making things. So like having a beaver as my persona really is like the most fitting thing I've come to realize over the last couple of years, to be like,
Oh yeah.
ever since I was a kid, like I mentioned the whole Simba costume when I was running around as a lion. Once that was, I outgrew that and it was too tattered and like broken to be useful. Post Hocus Pocus, I took a bunch of old costumes and old clothing and made a black cat costume that I would secretly assemble at night so I can crawl around my room and meow and like pretend I was a cat. And I mean, that got me into learning how to sew when I was in college, and then doing all this other stuff. And I've had an affinity for craft, like building things with my hands, because there's nothing more satisfying than creating something. And I've been addicted to that since I was young. Be it machinimas, doing like video game things with like Smash Brothers or Grand Theft Auto or Warhawk or whatever the game is, to filmmaking, photos, photo editing, photo manipulation, like drawing. And then when it came to things like the badges and whatnot I started making, it's all because of Anthrocon. I was going to
Anthrocon.
Yeah, I was going to Anthrocon for the first time, and I believe 2015 was the first year I went. And I didn't have any badges. I saw all these cool badges people had, and I'm like, oh, that's super neat. I don't have any, but I have a printer, I have Photoshop, and I love TF. So I took my driver's license, my California driver's license, I looked at it, and I'm like, what data on here can I change to fit TF? And so I came up with the design for the official transformation license, and I liked it, so I started selling it. Now, at the time, it was 2 pieces of cardstock laminated.
Oh my god.
And then, so it wasn't weatherproofed, so they kind of got damaged. I call them Gen 1s.
Yeah.
Too long after that, I was talking with a TF story writer, actually, who's one of my friends, and he's like, I was considering buying this printer, this specific printer sitting behind me, and it could handle PVC cards. And so I'm like, I don't know if I should pick this up. And he's like, yeah, you should do it. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, fuck it. I deserve it. So I picked it up and I started printing the Gen 2 cards, the Gen 2 transformation licenses on PVC. So they're the same size as a credit card. They look and feel like a credit card and they fit in your wallet. And they're way more weatherproofed. And so since then, I was like, I'm going to make a Pokemon one because I want a Pokemon one. It mainly spawned out of me wanting things for myself greedily. Just being like I want a little badge that says what I like in TF. And that's like a TF thing. And no one makes it, so I will make it. And like the Pokemon ones or the Pleasure Island tickets, which is a fun tangent I'll get on in a second. But it all spawned from just, I wanted a badge for myself at the con, so when I ran into people I knew on the internet, I could be like, yeah, I'm this guy, I do these morphs, like, here's my badge of, like, XYZ, and I could put little Easter eggs. There's dozens of little Easter eggs in all of my things that no one will find out, because they're way too, was it esoteric? Is that the right word?
Yeah, that's the right word.
They're way out there, and I'm like, yeah, on the Gen 1, like, TF licenses, you can see, like, dots in the back. That's dot code that says transformation, but, like, you'll have no idea. Like, little things, like, the flag for TFN is the naval flags of T and F, and and if you take those two flags, you combine them. I changed the colors a little bit, too, because I think orange and blue looks good. Obviously, so do many film posters. But it's the naval flags for T and F, and with a little bit of extra flair. And it's like all of that kind of stuff. Every barcode you see is unique on all of those, or at least they try to be. So between designs, they might not be, but like each, like copies of the designs might not be. But on most of the designs, the barcodes are unique, and they'll say something fun, like if the person likes wolf TL, it's like, oh no, I'm a wolf, but in barcode.
That's
stuff
amazing.
Like that.
Oh my gosh.
And so, yeah, it's been very fun because I get to use the word, I get to flex a bit with my graphic design stuff because I really do love graphic design work. It's just a fun, I never want to do it for work. I never want to take money doing it. I just really enjoy doing it. It's like editing. I love editing. I hate editing for clients, but I love editing. And so most of the time too, I'll just be sitting in Photoshop with it open like right now, and I'll just like throw some fonts down, play around with some stuff. I'm like, oh, this looks kind of cool. I'm going to call this a furry ID badge. Like, once I became more and more involved in just basic furry, not to be mean to furries who aren't into TF, but
they're
like...
still valid.
Exactly. But there's an extra flair. It's like, I know you love your otter character, but wouldn't it be great to become them? Yeah. That's how it corrupted my boyfriend Stamp.
Amazing.
He's a normal furry. He liked his otter. He is an otter. And then it's like, one day it's like, but what would it be like to become the otter? And now he's into tigers and Pokemon, all this crazy stuff.
Amazing.
So, but it's a lot of, kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. But yeah, it's just like a ton of fun, and just you get to play around. Oh, the furry ID badge. The furry ID badge was just, I wanted a generic furry badge, like I have my Sona on instead of just my human self, and be like, here's just a little bit about me. I'm an artist, and like, here's a quick QR code you can scan to go to the site. And like, funnily, I don't know how people find these because I don't advertise. I'm terrible with advertising my like website and stuff. But like my Pokemon licenses that have like your starters on there and like the first region you're on, it has like the badges on the back. A bunch of random people found that. Like, I just, non-furries, like, they'll submit pictures of my favorite stories. It was a gift for like a kid who's, I think, 10, and he played Pokemon with his uncle. And so his uncle was getting him one of my licenses. And he's like, yeah, this is a gift for him. And like, he wanted this video embedded with the thing. He's like, yeah, I know, like, we loved playing Pokemon Go and all this other stuff. And he's like, just because you're turning 10, I don't want you to stop, like, don't feel bad about like playing Pokemon. Pokemon are super cool. And I'm like, oh my god, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, this kid loves Pokemon, but his uncle's concerned he might not like it anymore because he's like growing up. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make him a fake letter from Kanto. So I wrote up this letter from it had like official seal of Kanto on the front and all this stuff. I went to the store and I bought specific Pokemon cards. I'm like, what are his favorite ones? Charizard? Give me a Charizard card, do this, and I packaged it all up and sent it off. But it's like, going back to like art and stuff and like the reactions of people, I love having those, like, people getting those physical things, especially like at cons. I started making the Pleasure Island tickets and the Transformation business cards, which I totally forget how those came about, but they're just super fun. A great icebreaker too, because I'm very nervous with like making a jackass of myself in front of people, unless it's the braying and bucking kind, in which case that's phenomenal. Bring it on. I like braying. It's great to just like, hey, how's it going? Pick your fate. Like, it's randomized. Like, I love that sort of TF. So it's a great way to break the ice. It's fun, and I'll never forget some interactions I've had the last couple years where, actually it must have been 2019, a couple years ago, because of the pandemic and everything. But I remember I was at a con, and I'm super sorry if you're listening to this podcast, because I forgot exactly who it was. But the memory stayed with me. Is somebody pulled one of those cards out of their wallet, and they were like, I've kept this in my wallet every year since you gave this to me, and I'm just like, my hand over my heart. I'm like, oh my god, and I've gotten that reaction with several people. They're like, they'll show off their badges, or I'll see someone around a con wearing something I made, and I'm like, that is the greatest thing ever. Like, that is just so cool. And yeah, like the Pleasure Island tickets, just to give props to the designer of the front. The front is based off of the design by HMH, who's a phenomenal donkey transformation photomanipulation artist.
Yeah.
And so it was a few pieces they did with the Pleasure Island ticket. And so when I was playing around with Pleasure Island stuff, I designed the back to the card, because there's no back that I've seen that was shown in anything. So I designed my own back, and then I redesigned the front based off theirs and messaged them and like, is this okay? I'll put this on my website that you did the front design. They're like, yeah, that's cool. And so it went from being printed on a PVC card, which kind of never looked right, to now I print them on actual card stock, and then they're hand scored, and then I like put the sides together and trim them and do all of that by hand. So like, everything I make is super hands-on. So it's very slow to get things out, but like, it's a labor of love.
Yeah, it's worth it. I still have, to mention people hanging on to those things. I remember at Anthrocon 2019, I got from you, there was one of those, like, the lousy TF IDs.
Yes.
And so mine was, I got TF'd into a Doberman, and all I got was this badge. And then there's, like, the thing in brackets about, like, belly rubs, I think. I still have that. I wear that at cons as part of my, like,
oh my God, I love
regalia.
It.
So, I agree. I think there's a unique thrill towards having physical media that you can hold and, like, express your kind of interests through it. And I know that, there's a few other people out there who do make physical TF media that's really cool. Though one other person that comes up to mind is, I think, V_werewolf, who does a lot of like the full moon denim jackets and like a lot of the other cool stuff that he makes. He does amazing stuff with that too. And I think it's a similar vibe of like those handcrafted labors of love that you can engage with as a TF fan. I think is just really fantastic.
Yes, and just to shout out a couple people, one of the earliest like physical TF media things I've seen was from Stripes/Royal.
Yep.
They had a product, a faux product called Shift, I believe, SHYFT, and they had two versions of it. I think one was an inflatable. Maybe mistaken. I think one was like an orca inflatable, or at least it was orca themed. I forget the second one, but he did the box, he did everything, and I'm like, I love that sort of stuff, because I was like, when I was a kid, still now to a degree, I was very actually not now. I take that back. When I was a kid, I was super embarrassed about TF stuff. Like, I didn't want to read, a blanking on the name, but the famous TF thing everyone talks about.
Reading it.
With the cover that ever blanket on it.
Oh my gosh!
I have Animorphs in my brain because I want to mention them, but Animorphs.
I'm blanking.
It's Animorphs.
Animorphs. Yeah.
Because I was thinking of in Animorphs, and I was like,
you're thinking of the person, right? Not the.
I'm thinking of Chaco. So Animorphs. I was too embarrassed to read those as a kid because I'm like, what if people know that I like transformation like a lot? So I'm like, I can't risk it. Not going to read it. But it's funny because I did accidentally come across a book called Dr. Franklin's Island, which I'm sure not too many people have heard of. If they have, amazing. I thought it was a fever dream until like fairly recently. Yeah. And just go on a tangent about that book. Dr. Franklin's Island, you can think of as like a children's version of the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh yeah.
It shares some similarities. And it's about two girls and like their friend. They get into like a plane crash and they end up on this island with this mad scientist. And the scientist like locks them into their own enclosures and was like, hey, everyone thinks you're dead, so we're gonna just keep it that way. And we're gonna slowly turn you into animals. The main character, that's from her perspective, she gets turned into a feral manta ray over the course of the entire book. And so it's deeply psychological, which probably all of this definitely plays into what I like about TF.
Yeah.
It's deeply psychological of her going through, like, I can no longer walk on land, like, all of this stuff. But she, like, maintains herself through the book, whereas her friend, who's becoming a giant bird, and I think it was an eagle or a hawk, she's becoming a bird of prey. And her mind is definitely going way more feral. She's not acting like herself, etc. And like the scientists are really like, oh, this is super interesting. We like her a lot better. You're just a fish. So, like, yeah, that book definitely hit really deep for me. So like finding that, but being embarrassed about Animorphs. I keep saying Animorphs. Yeah, that one I treasured amongst other like books of my childhood. But to shout out Royal, that was one of the first ones I saw that helped inspire me to like eventually start when I started making this sort of stuff. Like I was making craft stuff for like friends in college. My roommate loved Fallout New Vegas a ton. So for his birthday one year, I made him all the Nuka-Colas. And the Nuka-Cola Quantum glowed because I like put a little LED in the base so you can click it on and it actually just glowed. And it was phenomenal. And so like when I started making TF stuff, I'm like, oh, hey, I can do bottles and labels and all this cool stuff. So I was super stoked. I actually got to make Royal a gift of I'm probably gonna butcher it because it's French. It's Eau de Poodle. It's cologne or cologne.
Yes, I know what you're talking
Poodle
about.
cologne. So I'm like, I hope it held up because that was early on when I was doing printing, and I've gotten way better, and I use different inks and everything's way more durable and waterproof and water resistant, UV resistant, etc.
Yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, that's kind of cool. It can come full circle. Like I remember seeing his stuff, and I'm like, yeah, that'd be sweet. I want that on my shelf, and being able to make them now.
To make something to him.
Yeah, and just leaning back on my shelf, I have a second bottle of that because I made two in case one broke. I could be like, here's a second one. But I have that, and I have like a skunk potion on my nightstand and some other stuff. Now I have. I mean, if anyone walks in my room and if they look at my room, they're like, "Oh yeah, there's two drawings of me turning into a dog on the back of my door." My friend, who's slowly becoming a furry, and he's the one who brought up my transformation sequence. He closed my door once, and the back of my door is just nothing but TF sketches and whatnot I've gotten from artists and like all this other stuff on it, and like photo manipulations because now I've gotten into printing and doing physical media a bunch. I've been printing morphs, which look phenomenal. I don't know if you ever printed a morph before.
I haven't. That's incredible.
You should do it. It is so cool. And so one thing I want to offer to people I do morphs for is I want to print them and ship it to them because especially with my new printer I just got this week, I printed a couple morphs and I'm like, I can see every fur, like all the fur detail. And like amazing. It's wild because now you're holding a physical printout of you but turning into a cat or whatever you're turning into, a bear or a donkey. I'm just seeing things around my room and naming them.
Damn, that's incredible. I'm gonna have to print something of mine at some point because now I want to see it. I want to see it in the flesh, you know. Yes,
exactly. But yeah, it's that I love the physical media, and I know like the reason why in Animorphs or Choco Pony was in my head when I was trying to think of Animorphs is they have tons of really cool TF stuff at their booths at different conventions and stuff, like little pill bottles. I have one of his pill bottles. I forget which one. I think it's the inflatable one. Again on my nightstand, and like seeing their stuff too. I'm like, yes, I have ideas. I have so many ideas, and I've been just like slowly working on them between work days and whatnot. But it's like I love seeing all of this stuff from people. There's a person named Noe in the TF fandom, and I didn't know they've been doing this for a while, but they make these TF vials, and they have printout labels that have like the scientific name of the critter they're becoming and like a barcode. And I'm like, I live for this shit. Like, I love it. It's so cool.
We need more.
Now I know how to pronounce their name properly. Neagle.
Yep.
I did it.
You did it.
I'm terrible at pronouncing names, and Zill was very kind in assisting me. So Neagle has the potions, the little transformation potions.
The little potions are so cool that he does.
Those are amazing. They're phenomenal. I'm very sad I actually didn't jump on the chance to buy one. I was always paralyzed with indecision of like, do I get a custom beaver? Maybe I just get like a bear or like a camel or something. Like, I don't know, or Char, or just the female one. Like, I don't know. Just gotta pick something. And I never did. But like their stuff, or werewolf, or like V Werewolf, my goodness, all of their stuff is phenomenal. The most recent Former Humans Welcome,
yes,
incredible
from V, yeah,
incredible. I love the other TF one that I really hope they make. It's the party one. I'm blanking off the top of my head, but I saw that and I'm like, that is phenomenal. It's like the live, laugh, love one, but it's TF stuff.
Oh yeah, the TF stuff. Yeah.
I need to.
I hope that one gets made.
I'm scrolling back right now to find that because I want to shout them out. If you haven't heard of them, go check out their stuff. It's incredible. I have one of their deer hats, and
the hats are great.
I wore that on Christmas in 2020, I believe, because there's the pandemic. So yeah, I think it was 2020 Christmas, and went to my grandma's house, and I was wearing my caribou mask and the deer hat, and like all of my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and my grandma were like they're laughing and they're loving it, and they're like, "That's the greatest thing ever. You're Santa's helper." And I'm like, "Yes, if only you knew."
If only. Well, it's really funny you mentioned that as well, the indecision between choosing species and, embodying all these different kind of animals.
Yes.
It's interesting. I've always noticed that, even though you technically have beaver in your name, you rarely stick to one thing as being like your Sona, which is really unique. Like you tend to switch it up quite a bit, your That Isle blank, That Isle whatever. So why do you often switch things up? Like, is it a TF thing, or is there another reason why just having one species doesn't feel like a solid base for very long?
I definitely think it's a TF thing. There are species that I think it's again, like, there's layers. It's an onion. There's a lot of layers when it comes to my Sonas. But I have no idea why I did that accent, but it just felt right in the moment.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like my Sona, there are critters that I find I connect with way more. So it is funny that it's become a meme, a little meme that it's That Isle something and just like name something random. When it comes to Sonas, it tends to be a short roster or a list, because I like to I consider it a playlist of different critters. I can go more into that in a second. There are critters like beaver that I connect with way more often. I think like if I were to have one species that really spoke to me, it would definitely be beaver. Though that has obviously changed from when I was an island fox, which is where the name comes from, That Isle Fox. And then once I was like experimenting with rodents, as weird as that sounds, I want it to sound weird. Once I was experimenting with being a beaver and I switched over to that, I'm like, well, I like that handle, That Isle Beav, and that stuck. And then because I'm a huge fan of transformation, when I started adding more and more things to that, dogs, cats, because I'm very nostalgic, and that's where my TF roots were, so I could never ditch cat. Cat would still be around. And then, obviously, for Friday the 13th, October, something like that, I'm like, well, instead of just being That Isle Beav and having a cat Sona, I'm going to be That Isle Cat for the month, or the week, or the day. And I could play it in with TF and whatnot. And then I started adding more and more critters, and then, obviously, Pokemon, which adds another huge amount.
Oh, of course.
It's fun, and it definitely plays into the fact that I like, if you've ever seen a picture of my room, most people haven't. My room has a lot of knickknacks, has a lot of like memories. Like I have, just looking to my upper right, I have the first ever thing I bought at a furry convention, which was Cali Fur in like 2014 or 2013.
Oh my
I went
gosh.
there by myself. I was hyper nervous. I owned a foxtail. I walked around a little bit, stood awkwardly, bought some things, and left. But I have like a pin from working BlizzCon. I have actually the badge from Cali Fur. I have a bunch of little like pieces of things. So when I transitioned from a fox to a beaver, I didn't leave the fox behind. Like I didn't want to just say it's gone now. I did that with the red fox actually. I was a red fox first, but I was also a tails recolor. So when I landed on an island fox, I'm like, this feels right. I'm gonna keep this.
Yeah.
But so instead of getting rid of it, I just added it to the roster as I call it, or added to the playlist. And then as I started adding more and more critters on for different reasons, like I mentioned black cat, because black cats are how I got into transformation and thus furry, I was like, well, I have to have black cat on there. And I'm a huge dog fan. I love dogs, dog TFs, all that kind of stuff. So dog was a natural fit for that. And then obviously like more and more critters. Some critters I have less direct connection with. Others I've created the connection a bit more over time. Like coyotes. I love coyotes to death. They've always shown up on my roster, but I'm like never a coyote. It's very funny.
You gotta change that.
I know, right? Great. I need to be that Isle Yodi. But I have like design ideas for them, but I never really gone far enough into it. But now I have a design idea with Jackal that I'm like, both of them together, I need to do something like very cool with the crossovers on that with TFTG and whatnot. I'm like, yes, I got ideas. I need to do them. But yeah, there's more or less stronger connections with certain ones. Like badgers, I just really like badgers. Spotted skunks, I just like spotted skunks. Other ones like bears, I live off a street named after bear. Generic, it's called Oso. So Spanish for bear. So like nice. That, I live in California, whose state animal is a bear, and the bear's on the flag, the Bear Flag Republic. So I'm like, you have bear there, and then there's an annual pilgrimage my family and I go on to a place called Bass Lake, and the number one motif everywhere in that entire area is bears. There's bears on signs. There's bear like plushes they sell. Everything is bears everywhere. So I'm like, that bear connection, the fact I live off a street and enter a bear in the Bear Flag Republic, I'm like, bear is a very strong one. So it's like second on the list.
Yeah.
But it's like, there's a lot of, you can attest to this too. I think most people listening can. There's a lot of very fun critters to be. There's a lot of fun animals. You'd be like, yeah, I wouldn't mind being a puma or a cougar or a mountain lion, whatever people call it. Apparently has so many names. Mm-hmm. But like, it's fun to experiment with that. Now, some of them, like I have considered adding cougar to my list. Some of them they might be fun for a TF, but you'll never see them stick around. Like I haven't done that Isle hyena or stuff like that, because like I don't think I've actually been a hyena, or I have like once, I believe once, and they're neat, but they're not me. So I do kind of differentiate between like sonas and things that I've just, because I love TF, I like to experiment, and critters I just wanted to transform into at least once to try. Like it's funny, I did that Isle Wendigo once as like a Halloween-y thing, and I got a picture from Sketchy, who's fantastic artist, super nice guy too. He wanted to do a Wendigo, and I was like, I'm totally down. So I commissioned him, and it was phenomenal. And I used it on my Discord, and one of my friends was like, do you have a Wendigo Sona now? And I'm like, not really. Just wanted to do it because it seemed fun, but it's not really a Sona. Like I do differentiate between like specific animals and Pokemon that are like, these are personal to me and I'm going to switch between them. And like just other critters I'll just do one-offs of or enjoy. Like there are certain like goats. Goats aren't really in my playlist of critters, but I love goat transformation, and like donkeys. I love donkey transformation and whatnot. Pigs too. Lots. It's easier to probably name critters I don't like than critters I do like.
Then you do. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, like, when you kind of do these kind of detours into some of the less common species, if they're not on the playlist, it's not so much that you're identifying with them from a Sona perspective, but you just kind of like exploring TF and going wherever your heart takes you in that moment, and
Exactly.
trying on a form for a bit, but it's
Yeah.
not like a Sona per se.
Yeah, I'll definitely always toy with the idea. Like, I love Tortoise TF, which is definitely not like one of the most popular ones. And because I really love shelled critters, so I have Koopa on the list. Koopa is one of my favorite ones. But
Koopa's great.
yeah, Koopa's 10 out of 10. And we need more Koopa Troopas, everybody, because there's a lot of Royals, but we need way more troops. So sign up today. Join your Royals. I do make Koopa Troopa and Koopa like ID cards that like for some friends and I who have Koopa Sonas. So if you have one and you want one, let me know and I will make a Koopa one.
Okay, good.
But yeah, so like for those critters, it's just fun to be every now and again. But I don't really have they're not on the playlist. And the reason I keep mentioning playlist is I am a huge fan of music. I've always loved music. I was in bands for multiple years, and I was advanced in band, and I skipped a year in middle school to join wind ensemble, and I was like second chair flute because I didn't want to be first chair because first chair had to do solos, and I was afraid. So I purposefully I threw tests on purpose. I'd be like, if I do just well enough, I won't have to be first chair. I could be second chair, and I could still be up front, but not actually have to do solos. Same thing in college. I did a report on An American Werewolf in London, and I had to give a speech in front of like 150 people, and I'm like, you know what? I get straight A's in this class. I'm skipping that one day. And I missed the one day. I got an A on the report, but missed the one day, and I still got an A in the class. I'm like, cool.
There you go.
Solved. But to go back, I go on a lot of tangents.
That's okay.
To go back to why I called it a playlist is music's been very, very important in my life. And it's funny how I can track certain things with certain times of what music I like. Like when I was an Island Fox, my number one favorite band was the Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Molly. So Irish punk or Irish folk punk, however you want to categorize it.
Yeah.
So that my Island Fox Sona had very Irish roots, and that also goes off like I'm adopted. My family is Irish. I'm definitely not. I'm like now I found out Native American, like 50% Native American. So
Nice.
completely different. So that built into why I was an Island Fox in the first place. I was a Red Fox for the longest time, and then obviously I knew I was adopted my whole life. And then it was a trip coming back from Hawaii where my dad was telling me, like, we actually have no idea what you are. Which, at that point, I'm like, I wanted to know. This is when I turned 18. I really wanted to know. And then knowing I would never find out, I was like, well, we happen to be flying over the Channel Islands. And the Island Fox I knew about, it's a specific fox that lives off the coast of Los Angeles, where I was born. And so I'm like, from this day forth, I'm going to be an Island Fox. And from that day forth, I was an Island Fox.
There you go.
And so that Sona wears a flat cap, an Irish flat cap, wears green, and is very Irish-centric. Well, in college, I got into ska. I got into ska really late, guys. I got into ska in like the 2010s, whereas it peaked in the 90s.
Very late to the trend.
It peaked in the 90s.
90s are calling.
I was so sad when I was like, what? They're no longer... Oh, God. What? They stopped? No, dang it. So one of the first pieces I got of my Sona as it is currently was from Betsy the Beaver, who drew me as my beaver, as she drew my Sona dancing to ska music. And I'm like, this is phenomenal. So once I transitioned to ska, that's when I became a beaver. And so like when it comes to all of my critters, I assign them songs. I try to go one different artist / like album per animal. So Island Fox gets the song May the Living Be Dead in Our Wake, which is my favorite song from Flogging Molly. And sometimes they're not my favorite song by the artist, but they're a song that fits.
Fitting one.
Somewhere in the Between is the album I discovered from Streetlight Manifesto that I maybe fall in love with the band. I heard some songs of theirs before because my former roommates really liked them, but it didn't click until specifically, blanking on the name right now. It has animals in it. They're all animals. Would You Be Impressed? Where all of the band members are animals and they're singing about bunch of different things. But the music video is super cute, and Tokay, the lead singer, is totally a furry. Just gonna call him out right now on this podcast. 100% a furry. Every single time he's shown as a cat or a lion. His website has lion butts and like lions. All of the art where he does something solo, cats or lions every time.
He's a furry.
100%. But going back to it, Would You Be Impressed was the song that got me to listen to Streetlight and see them and be like, this is really, really fun. And one of the last songs on the album is Somewhere in the Between, the titular song about life, celebrating life, the inevitable death of us all, which is the funny thing about listening to Streetlight is it's ska. So there's a lot of ska bands that are like upbeat and like happy songs singing about pancakes or whatever, like literally. And then Streetlight comes around and like, we're going to sing about cancer. And it's like horribly depressing if you read the lyrics, but it's like upbeat, fast, and fun. And Somewhere in the Between is the perfect album about celebrating life and everything. So I'm like, that song became the Beavs theme song. And then as I like moved down the list to other critters, they each have a different meaning attached to them. The black cat being my first Sona in a way, because after being hyper jealous of Binks turning into a cat and me wanting to be a cat for so long, I was like, this needs to be a nostalgic song. And there's a song by the band State Radio called, God, I'm going to be blanking on a bunch of these names because I'm just trying to grab them off the top of my head. The Knights of Bostonia, or just Knights of Bostonia. That song is about childhood, or to me, it's about childhood. It's about, like, what they're singing about specifically is, like, at least to me, it sounds like these kids who are playing, and they know the summer's coming to an end. It's the last days of summer, and they're enjoying it. And so they're singing about, like, we are the Knights of Bostonia. I got a trash can lid on my wing and, like, on my arm, and they're playing these games, and they're out in the street to fight the coming fall. And they're, like, to fight the inevitable autumn that's coming. And I'm like, that hits so many, like, fond memories of my friends and I that I'm like, yeah, the cat gets that song. And so, like, just going down a list of different critters and whatnot, like, the song Working Man by Imagine Dragons is my camel song, because that sounds like a very fun song for a camel to dance to. But, yeah, it's like, not every critter gets elevated to that, but there are certain ones that do, and I'm like, I really cherish that. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun that TF adds to the daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense why you'd call it the playlist then, given that content.
Exactly.
No, that's awesome. Amazing. So, I have two audience questions to go over with you before we close things out here. The first question comes from our common commenter, Fire, and they said, imagine you and a bunch of friends could shapeshift. Multiple forms is allowed. On the spot, make a game you could play with them that incorporates your transformation abilities. Bonus points if it would not work without the transformation abilities. I'm going to let you go first because I need time to think.
Well, if we're making a completely custom game, I might need more time to think. My first thing to come to mind was like an advanced hide-and-seek game.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because someone can shapeshift into a mouse and try to hide somewhere, and like the person like can try to... It could be like a predator-prey type thing where it's like all the people who are hiding have to be prey animals, and the person like... Or even a reverse of that. Like, the people hiding have to be predators, and the prey has to find them. Something like that. And then when they get found, they have to shapeshift into the opposite, and then track down the others. Or you could even do it like, what's it called? I forget the movie, but the One of Us. Like, the whole shtick of, joining the pack of rats or whatever, too. You could have that be the game. Is like, everyone starts as a human except for like one who's an anthro rat, and then as they find people, they turn them into rats and be like, "Oh no, the pack is coming!" Like to engulf you, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. I love that. I think the one I would come up with on the spot would be kind of like a 3 strikes and you're out sort of like paintball gun game where you can only get hit up to 3 times, and each time you get hit you TF more. So maybe actually it would be 5 instead of 3, because I think 5 would work better for this. So like you have to TF a little bit every time you get hit, and by the time you get to 5, you're fully TF'd, and so you're out of the game because you can't use the paintball gun anymore.
I
think
love
that would be fun.
That's also a great idea for a trigger. Like if you get
Oh
shot,
yeah.
shot in the arm, now you have a deer arm and like a deer hoof, and you're trying to like hold the paintball gun, and then you get shot in like the leg, and now you have
Yeah.
another hoof, and you're like, oh no, that would be
I would love
phenomenal.
that.
I like yours
That'd be
better.
amazing.
Yours is great.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a little bit of extra time to think about it, so I did take advantage of that.
Good, good.
And then the other question we have is from an anonymous viewer who said, what would you say is the most unique trigger you've ever used in a piece, either one you've made or one you've commissioned, and
Ooh,
what inspired using it?
that one I have to think about a bit. I'm trying to think of like
Yeah,
the wildest,
the wildest trigger.
the wildest trigger.
Uh,
I'm a huge fan of magic
oh
over
yeah.
science in TF, so a lot of mine are like curses and spells.
Oh yeah.
So I'm trying to think of. I mean, it's not the weirdest. I'll probably, if I go back in my gallery real quick, I could probably find something that's
Yeah. I've got
weirder.
one.
Oh yeah,
I've
what's
got
yours?
one. So I did a TF once. It was a manip of myself into a camel, and the
Nice.
premise behind the image was that you were being taken, like you were on location in Egypt, and a picture is being taken of you for like one of those "Wish You Were Here" cards. But the act of taking the picture also TF'd you into a camel, and then the picture on the camel was you as a camel saying "Wish you were here." So basically, you were TF'd for a shitty postcard,
Oh
which
my
I think
god.
is wildly hilarious.
Also, you need to print that as a postcard.
I do, I really do.
Or send that to me and I will print that for you as a postcard and then send it to you and it'll be super meta because you'll get a postcard of yourself being turned into a postcard. Camel image. I don't know, it'll work. It sounded better in my head.
That would be amazing. Oh my gosh.
I
Oh,
think I'm trying to think of the most. Some of mine are just like triggerless. Like this is oh here's a guy who
oh yeah,
half into a kangaroo. Like it was definitely later on too where I was not even later on. I was doing stories, adding little stories to things. But
yeah, yeah.
I think I'm trying to think because I know I did set like a sequence where I ate a salad and I turned into a kangaroo, which is like
Oh
not
yes.
like that's not normally like a connection. Like food triggers aren't that like strange or wild, but
No.
it's a kangaroo salad. Like okay, cool.
Yeah,
I think
I think the connection between salad and kangaroo was unique.
yeah. Why, thank you. I think one of the weirdest ones I can think of that comes to mind is I had one where I just thought it sounded neat, and then in retrospect, it probably just sounded really corny. Where somebody gets a phone call from, I think I forget if it's like a robocall or just somebody on their line who just says "calling all collies come home," and then that hearing
Oh,
that turns them into a collie,
amazing.
and I'm like, I just kind of liked the phrase "calling all collies come home," and so
Yeah,
I'm like a random phone call from a stranger that turns into a dog.
I love that.
That's a little different.
That is different, and I dig that. I think we should get more robocalls that turn people into animals.
I know, right? I would be totally down for spam calls if they turned me
Yeah,
into animals. It would be a little inconvenient if it was at work or something, but or driving.
yeah.
But
Or it could make that all that much more fun.
yeah, like a tailgating gator.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it would
Oh,
be don't crash your car and don't run out on the freeway as a deer.
yeah.
That's such a good challenge.
It'd be a great challenge. I would welcome that challenge.
Exactly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Travis, for coming on. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and you're always a great person to chat with. If people are looking for your stuff, where can they find you?
They can find me at Shadowfox014 in FA. I am also still on DeviantArt for some reason, even though I don't update it. At That Isle Beav, and I'm That Isle Beaver on Twitter.
Amazing.
Just wanted to say also thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. I'm a long-time listener. Really enjoy the show. And just want to say happy TF Tuesday to you and to everybody.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And, it's always great to see your stuff. So whenever you do come back to making it, I'm sure me and lots of other folks will be very excited to see it, whatever that may be.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kathy.
Amazing. Yeah. So thanks again, everyone, for listening. I hope you have a great week and a great TF Tuesday, and stay TFy. We'll see you next week.